Welcome to Spoilers Intended, a podcast about series, novels, and films. For this episode, James S.A. Corey takes us on a little dance for a look at Can Aliens Enhance and Give Humanity a Chance. That's right, we're talking Leviathan Wakes, first book in the Expanse. Hey everybody, welcome to the show. I'm Stephen Ford, joined as always by Andrew Knuckles.
Hello.
And Joel Killingsworth.
Hello.
Oh, that was a little delay. I don't like that.
He's staring at me.
I'm staring at you because you keep, you're inching closer and closer to my greeting, and it's mine.
I mean...
You have your own. Go away.
You're talking about inching closer and closer. I kept looking at you. I was like, he hasn't moved.
No, I've been trying to add in contextual hellos based on whatever we're talking about.
Okay.
But unfortunately... like Red Rising, I said, oi, which, they're Irish. But...
What?
But I was not going to attempt to do the Belter Creole from the Belt.
Oh, that would...
Expanse.
I'd need a lot of practice and run up for that.
Yeah, I just couldn't do it. So
I'm trying to think of how you even do a greeting in that, and I can't. So we're going to move on now. Before we jump right into Leviathan Wakes, that's right, it's coming up from a little nap. We
a very, very, very long nap.
A very long nap.
Thousands of years.
Tens of thousands.
Tens of thousands.
Actually, probably
of years,
longer than
probably,
that.
Yeah.
Anyways, we're going to do a little discussion before we just go digging down to wake up a Leviathan.
Yep.
Into our favorite fictional detectives.
Okay.
Because that kind of ties into this first book, and we'll get into that maybe a little bit in the pre-spoiler zone, and then really in depth in the spoiler zone. But
yeah,
so I'm going to kick this off to Andrew. Go first.
So they don't know what my
we've
choice
been
is.
waiting with bated breath.
Yeah,
in utter suspense.
Bottom. Yeah.
I said that already.
I know you said it, but I didn't. I ignored it. My favorite fictional detective of all time, honestly, is Inspector Clouseau from The Pink Panther, or the series of movies called The Pink Panther.
Yeah, not the animated.
Not the
very
animated.
Different.
Yeah, they're more just parodies of Inspector films,
yes.
And they're hilarious from like the 1950s and 60s. I think probably the best film that he was in was Pink Panther Returns with Richard Dreyfuss, I think. Maybe.
I'm having a hard time playing. You have the power in your pocket.
I did not look it up beforehand because he's just a
we might have looked over his shoulder and seen
Inspector Clouseau is a buffoon.
Yeah.
In the that his
a bumbling buffoon.
A bumbling buffoon that has been promoted with his incompetence up to the form of inspector, and he consistently will bumble his way through these capers of him trying to figure out who the bad guy is, and he always comes ahead, but in the most terrible fashions imaginable, most of the time at everyone else's expense.
So in the original run, the character was played by Peter Sellers.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
but there were two films where it was played by Steve Martin.
Mm-hmm.
Those were kind of almost reboot.
They were reboots,
they're reboot kind of material. What's your opinion on that? Like, is that just a don't even bother, or?
So it's really hard because the Peter Sellers ones are so funny.
Mm-hmm.
They still hold up. Like
they're such a classic.
And Steve Martin, he's never really hit it off with me, like just with his comedic style.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think they capture the same energy that Peter Sellers had from the original, especially with like Kato and just all of like the running gags that they have where like he has a bag of groceries and then the rice is falling on the ground.
Well, Peter Sellers himself is such a comedic whirlwind, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's like trying to follow Robin Williams, right? How do you even start?
Yeah. Well, and Steve Martin is kind of, I think, as a comedian, he's kind of better as almost the straight man role.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really not
Father of the Bride is a good example.
Like that's really not what you can do as Clouseau.
No, you have to
you're
be
not the straight man.
You have to be an idiot, and you also have to be this kind of
supremely confident idiot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and Peter Sellers just does such an amazing job. Probably my favorite scene of his is whenever he is dressed up in disguise as this old like sea pirate.
Mhm.
And he has this inflatable parrot on his shoulder, and the parrot gets a leak in it when he's trying to talk to the guy that he's like trying to like get information from, and every like couple seconds he has to pump up the pirate with or the parrot with his arm, and it is just like, and eventually he pumps it up so much that it shoots off of his shoulder. And it's God, oh man! If you've never seen the Pink Panther films, they're fantastic.
And
they're so
it's
fun.
honestly quite possible for you not to have, because they're not like huge market movies, and they're fairly old at this point.
Yeah,
you can get them off Amazon Prime. That's where we watched them. Okay. We watched through all of them maybe like last year, I think, during the height of pandemic stuff. But yeah, totally watch it if you never have before. They're just fantastic.
All right. Well, on that note, I'm going to toss this over to Joel.
Okay.
I bet he did not pick Pink Panther.
No, I did not pick Pink Panther. I threatened to pick whatever you picked, but it turns out
I'm not going to considered it, and it would have been hilarious if we had ended up on the same thing, because it was in my wheel.
Yeah.
Okay, but I am selecting Archie Goodwin from the Nero Wolfe novel series.
Okay.
So Nero Wolfe is the archetypical.
He keeps saying that word. I don't think he means what he means.
I am completely, fully, and utterly pronouncing every single syllable.
So
just go
during
away.
the pre-show, we thought he was saying near, N-E-A-R.
Or narrow. Or narrow. I really wasn't sure.
But he's saying Nero.
Nero.
Like
the Roman.
Nero, like the Roman emperor. Thank you. Thank you for expounding upon that, which was already crystal clear. Anyway, so the book series about the archetypical detective genius who is kind of a recluse and is,
too smart for everyone.
Yeah, too smart for everyone, but also is just very strange, very weird, And so like he's got quirks like Sherlock Holmes, like Poirot, that kind of style of detective. And so his assistant is Archie Goodwin, and Archie is really the main character of the book series. And, much like Dr. Watson is for Sherlock Holmes, except that Archie himself is close to genius level. He just always has to, he's always in Wolfe's shadow. But what his real strength is, and the reason that he stays on with Wolfe, is that Wolfe specifically hired him to annoy Wolfe enough so that Wolfe would work.
Yeah, I mean, well, okay. but I mean, you kind of like with those kind of, I'll say, eccentric genius characters, you kind of need to have someone to push them in a direction.
Yeah. And so like he is intentionally and with license annoying and caustic to Wolfe in a very fun manner. And he's got like a perfect memory, right? Like he can remember facts and figures and conversations that he can repeat verbatim days later. So like he himself is a highly competent character. But he's bored a lot of the time. There was one novel where one of the best parts of the book was he got thrown in jail by the local cop for being too uppity or whatever, and over the course of one night, he organized everyone who was in the local jail into a prisoners union to appeal for better living conditions just because he was bored.
Wow.
I mean,
yeah.
What else are you
got to entertain yourself somehow.
Yeah. So anyway, that is my favorite fictional detective.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. Good.
Yeah. So Stephen, what about you?
Well, Joel kind of tread upon my territory. He's already mentioned the name. I'm taking the classic here, Sherlock Holmes. So the reason why I really want to go with the classic, the quintessential, he's talking about, oh, this person is, an archetype in the mold of, right? This is the OG.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons it works so well is because, you go to the Conan Doyle, the classic, I'm sorry, Sir Conan
Sir
Doyle.
Conan Doyle. He is a knight.
Got to get it right. You go to the classic books and you get, all of Sherlock Holmes, right?
Yeah.
This is who he is as a character. But if that is not necessarily to your liking, because it's been in the public domain, there are a whole host of other interpretations of him. If you prefer, say, Robert Downey Jr.'s interpretation,
which he actually did a really good job.
It's actually pretty good.
In the films.
Or Benedict Cumberbatch.
Yeah, he was in the.
Yep.
I make fun of. We make fun of it so much that sometimes I'm like, wait, did I use his real name?
It was a TV show with the guy who
Martin Freeman.
Yeah, Martin Freeman.
Yeah, which is it's a good show.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's kind of where the appeal is, because like for Joel, this guy is the archetypal Sherlock Holmes style. Well, you don't have to go anywhere else. You can always have Sherlock Holmes, and you can get slightly different flavorings of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's really fun, because just in whatever format you want, there's even kind of the story that plays off of him having a sister. I think it's a sister.
Enola Holmes was the Netflix one. Right. It was actually pretty good.
The character was created for that movie, though, so that's fairly recent.
Yeah.
I mean, it is recent, but what I'm saying is you can catch any type of flavor, and that's just another example of the flavor that still kind of fits within the umbrella.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it's not maybe an original. I think it is approved or endorsed by the estate.
I think
no,
it was not endorsed by the estate.
Was. Well, either way,
yeah,
getting a field. So Sherlock Holmes, this is the archetype by which basically all detectives are measured against.
Yeah, it's all derivative after that,
and everything is derivative after that. All the genius who can't stay focused. Well, that's Sherlock Holmes. Crazy, weird work ethics. Sherlock Holmes. Annoys the police all the time. Sherlock Holmes. Like, all of these things have been done, and they were all done by Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
So it's really easy, especially once you say, well, I really like this flavor of it. I really like this version of it. It's very easy to find something really grasp, because you're really still getting, if you go to like the I guess it was BBC that did Bennett for Cumberbatch.
Yeah.
If you go to that version, you still get basically the exact same stories that you would get out of the book, but with a more modern
take on it. Yeah.
So you can find it kind of spanning across all kinds of different eras, I guess is the word I'm looking for. So it's something I really appreciate. And it, again, it's the archetypal. This is the genius connecting the dots
that he sees like 4 years ahead of time.
Yeah. He's also a character in a board game for Unmatched. And his whole deck is all about guessing what your opponent is trying to play. And if you get it right, then it has reversals on it. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
It's actually a really cool. It's a horrible mechanic, because your hand is only 5 cards. So once your opponent has a good idea what your hand is, it's just like, my agency. But it's also very cool.
So. Yeah. An honorable mention for that archetype too is Basil from Great Mouse Detective.
It's just furry Sherlock Holmes.
Well, but so Sherlock Holmes is actually in his universe,
right? Yeah, he lives in like a mouse hole under.
Yes.
Yeah.
Baker Street.
22-1B.
22-1. That was it.
But it's the exact same thing, just for kids.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, you can find it in any flavor.
Mm-hmm.
It exists.
Yep.
Professor Radigan was pretty terrifying as a kid, though.
Oh, he was.
Okay, no, that could be a whole separate topic on its own, of the idea that back in the 80s and the early 90s, it was just like, oh, it's animated, rubber stamp it is for kids. It doesn't matter what kind of horror is coming out of that paper.
Yeah, well, on that note too, All Dogs Go to Heaven was like nightmare fuel.
Oh my gosh, yeah, like the whole heaven versus hell.
Yeah, well, and just like the character designs, and just, oh man, it was just terrifying. Yeah, even the first American Tale, not Five Goes West, but the first one, just American Tale. Okay, yeah, I didn't know if there was a subtext.
You already had it.
But the finale with like the weird like mouse balloon mecha thing is just terrifying.
Or you just do like Secret of NIMH.
Yeah, I mean, you could even go even further. Watership Down.
Oh gosh, let's not. Anyways, now that we have gone far afield, off into what could be another topic for a later time.
Yeah.
Time to refocus back onto today's topic, which is Leviathan Wakes.
The first book of the Expanse.
Thank you. Yes, jumped right on in there. I'm going to hand this over to Joel. Joel, you want to give us maybe a little synopsis?
Yes. So, synopsis on Leviathan Wakes. We find ourselves in the it's not quite near future. It's kind of middle future,
The mid future.
The mid
middle
future.
future.
It's not the far future. It's not the near future.
This is Mama Bear future.
This porridge is just right. So humans have expanded from the Earth to colonize the solar system.
Right.
Mars is undergoing terraforming. It is still several generations away from being for people to be able to live on the surface of Mars, but that's the dream, that's the goal, that's what's happening there. And then asteroids and dwarf planets all throughout the asteroid belt have been colonized and mined for resources, and there are even bases on moons of Saturn and Jupiter and all of that stuff going on.
I don't think there's anything on Saturn. I think it's just
the moons of Jupiter.
I think it's just Jupiter, if I remember correctly, because
Getting into some
when stuff happens
pedantry,
later on in the series, it all happens around Saturn.
Anyways, carry on.
Okay.
If I remember correctly.
Regardless, so there's a little bit of extra exploration beyond the belt, but the belt in general is kind of the border of human expansion.
Yeah.
Everything beyond that is getting into real risky territory.
Right. And so you have essentially three groups of humanity, where you have Earth, which is the birthplace of humanity, and so therefore has a lot of cultural importance, but it is overburdened, overpopulated, and just kind of old and worn down. And then you've got the other major power in the solar system, which is Mars, which is sleek and trim because everything has to have a purpose and everyone has to be doing their job, because there's no room for error in the dream of terraforming.
And there hasn't been room for error in decades.
Right.
It's kind of like the Starship Troopers meme where she looks at the camera and says, "I'm doing my part."
Yeah.
That's literally everyone in Mars.
Yeah.
And so they are a rival to Earth in power because they may be fewer in number, but they're stronger in will and technology.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the people of the belt, which outnumber everyone else by a lot, but the belt is so disparate and strewn about, and there's no central form of government or whatever. So this is kind of the exploited class of civilization.
It's very fragmented. It's very difficult to organize because it covers such a broad, not just geographical region, but also there's so many different cultures spread across it, so many different like old animosities, etc.
Well, and it's the main conflict of the show, or the book. Excuse me,
we're talking about
not
book.
show. The book is essentially class warfare, is kind of what it comes down to. Of Earth is still trying to hold on to the control that it has over the belt, and the belt is like, we don't want that.
Right. So you have these three different essentially political
Entities,
groups,
factions.
right? Yeah. And the book follows through from the perspective of a belter detective on one of the major stations in the belt, and an earther
Ice hauler commander,
kind of, works on a cargo ship, just dude running the space lanes.
He's like first
guy.
mate on the ship.
Yeah, he's the XO.
And so we've got these two main characters, and from their perspectives, we watch a grand political opera take place where the two major powers of the inner planets are positioning against each other and the people of the belt in order to exert their political control over the situation. And then there's a shadowy conspiracy going on that maybe ties everything together.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a pretty good summation.
Yeah, it's kind of, it has like a little bit of a traditional like hero's journey ish in there on top of a gumshoe detective story.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's one of many that have been labeled Game of Thrones in space.
Game of Thrones in space is a very good example of a close analog to the style of storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say it's that scope, at least for this first
There are
book.
no knights.
there are no knights and there are no horses.
No dragons.
Anyways.
So our composite score for this, and this is, composite between the three of us, looking at four main categories for novels, which is setting, character, plot, and the writing. So the actual style of the written word. And all of that together, we gave it a 8.7 out of 10.
That's pretty high.
So it's
Mhm.
quite high. We also have a separate entertainment value score, which between the three of us was a 9.3. So there were a few perhaps technical issues that we dinged on it a little bit, but it is absolutely really a must read if you enjoy science fiction or,
if you
or
have
political intrigue in any way.
any interest in hard sci-fi, if you're an Asimov or Arthur C. Clarke
Arthur C.
fan,
Clarke,
any
Ray Bradbury.
any of those classic hard sci-fi authors, if you are at all a fan of any of them, The Expanse is one of the best modern examples of about as hard a sci-fi as we're going to get.
Yeah.
It's like right on the borderline of true hard sci-fi, but it has a little bit of fantasy in
A
there.
little bit of magic, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it
expands on that.
Any sufficiently
Here it comes.
advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, right?
But the technological advances that humanity has in the book are within reason of what you think could exist.
Right. So like at the beginning, because this is the start of a very long series. It's a 9-book series, and so a lot of stuff occurs, and there are advances that are made, the kinds of things that you expect to see as a fictional world grows and changes.
Yeah.
But to begin with, the world building that went into setting this thing up is absolutely first rate. It is just about the best I've ever seen, because it takes so many of the things that we know and are familiar with in our own solar system, and if you're not familiar with them, you'll become familiar with them.
Arthurian jingleberries.
Yeah.
And no,
there's none of that.
None of that.
There's none of that.
No, that's right out. But they then, because like one of the main places that you are for most of the story is Ceres, which is a dwarf planet in the belt, the asteroid belt. That what they have done in the world building is that they said that over the course of generations they have caused this giant rock to rotate, and they have carved out the middle of it so that people live on the inside of it at a fraction of the Earth's gravity due to centrifugal force because of the rotation of the object. And so it's just thinking through all of the things, like what would humans really do if they had to live full time in space,
and what the effects would be on their bodies.
And there's because one of the things is that people who have been out in low gravity for all of their lives, particularly during their development as infants and children, they simply did not develop in a way that allows them to withstand normal gravity, and so they can't go onto one of the inner planets, or there will be significant health problems.
Yeah, and there are definitely plot points that hint at torture level kind of things for belt people that are captured by the inner like Earth or Mars, and basically using Earth's gravity to basically torture them because their hearts and their body can't actually like withstand the gravity.
Yeah. And so it's just a lot of stuff like that, not only the geography, but thinking through the implications of, well, if we decide that this is what's happening, what are the effects of that? And it's just everything has a, not necessarily the only answer that could be, but it has a good answer.
Yeah. And everything's really believable, and it's very tactile feeling, especially the cultures that S.A. Corey has kind of created. And even just like throwing you right into it, you kind of understand a lot of where these characters are coming from, what their backgrounds are, and the type of people that they are, just because of the culture that they're part of.
Yeah.
And it's worth pointing out that S.A. Corey is a pen name of two authors who are collaborating to write these. And for the Game of Thrones allusions or whatever, one of them actually worked for George R.R. Martin, was one of his personal assistants.
Yeah, before they went off and did their own thing.
Which, maybe that's why his writing slowed down a little. We don't know.
He just writes blogs now. It's fine.
He just talks about the jets.
But to go back to the world building part, the actual like where this project began was actually for a tabletop role playing game. It was a setting for that.
I actually didn't know that.
Yeah,
which is actually pretty cool, because there is a RPG set of rules for The Expanse.
Which
If we're going to convince Andrew to play D&D,
That would be probably the
that's
closest
probably the
approximation
best,
I would
yeah.
do. Yeah.
But anyway, so like it's like there was all of this work that they had already put into, well, we've got this great world. Now we just need stories for it. And a lot of times when you come so strongly to a project with, well, we've already got this, we just need this other piece to make it work. A lot of times it can feel unbalanced, but this one doesn't. It handles the story part not just as well, because the world building is just so good.
Yeah.
But
and that's true of most sci-fis.
Yeah.
Right? The world that is being built is kind of a character of its own for most sci-fis, because that's who you're really showing off.
Yeah.
But to your point about it being written as a tabletop, that makes a lot more sense when you're looking at it from a consistency and rules and things kind of generate organically within it.
Yeah.
Because the world as a whole, and when I say world, the solar system, feels very lived in. Things are all they've happened for reasonable reasons, even if those reasonable reasons are humans are stubborn and illogical, et cetera, et cetera. And you really get the feel of kind of the resource scarcity.
Yeah.
And you've lived your whole life in space. There are certain things that you are just aren't going to be available, that are you're always at risk of, like, et cetera, et cetera.
Not having air or water.
Yeah.
And how big a deal just, oh, well, the water's going to be difficult this month.
Yeah,
how
or the air
is.
Recyclers are going out.
Yeah. Right, the filters,
Yeah, there's such a big disparity of just these characters in these different cultures where, obviously you live on Earth, you have free air and free water forever. And then, you live theoretically. But you live in the belt, and those are now precious resources that have to be siphoned or rationed or whatever. But honestly, like even just world building aside, the actual story for Leviathan Wakes, if you've never read it before, is really gripping, and it grabs you pretty quickly. And once it holds on, it does not stop.
No, it does not let go.
Yeah, the action is pretty high from the beginning, and it just keeps going from there. I think my favorite part about the book was the way that they handled travel.
Yeah,
because the way that the kind of the big light bulb moment that is put into the background of this that allowed humanity to proceed this far into space is a drive, an engine that was efficient enough with fuel that you could maintain a large degree of thrust for essentially indefinite periods of time. And there's still fuel limitations, but they are negligible compared to the fuel limitations that we're dealing with today in reality. So they literally can be at 1G of thrust and be simulating Earth gravity on their ships for half of a journey, go on the float for a minute, flip the whole ship around, and then decelerate for the other half of the journey at 1G, and essentially be under gravity the entire time. And that is absolutely the fastest way that you can get anywhere. And so the limiting factor from us being able to do that is we just don't have an engine that can burn fuel efficiently enough of whatever form to do that.
Yeah.
Right. Well, of course, also a big limiting factor within the books is how many Gs can you actually withstand?
Right. It's not how many Gs can you generate. It's the squishy humans inside the tin can.
Because you can generate plenty of Gs. Yeah. There's just no one's going to survive.
Yeah, and a lot of the combat revolves around these very intense maneuvers that the characters have to do to, one, survive because they're in combat or they're trying to catch something or whatever, and there are limitations to the human body that don't allow them to go harder than what they are doing.
Right. Yeah. You have the option to outmaneuver your opponent. You just may not survive that maneuver.
And the one thing that I do really enjoy about this book series is it does feel that no character is ever safe. It just has that kind of Game of Thrones style feeling where this guy could die in any moment. And you don't know it until it happens, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a fantastic book. I definitely recommend it.
Yeah,
I've read it twice already.
It is really a must read if you're at all interested in the genre.
Yeah.
But it looks like we've arrived at the intermission. Afterward, we're burning at high G straight into spoilers. If you aren't ready for spoilers, this is your stop. But before you go, if you liked what you heard, you can support us at patreon.com/spoilersintendedpodcast. If you decide to stick around, grab the nearest crash couch and step in, because here comes the juice.
All right, everyone, welcome back. Hope you enjoyed a short intermission. We are now spoilers free, and they are going
we are
to
weapons
be...
free.
Well, no, spoilers are free, and they come at you fast.
You get a spoiler.
We got
You get a
fast
spoiler.
mover.
Everybody gets a spoiler. Alrighty, so what was our composite again?
Our composite was 8.7.
8.7. So we're gonna break down how we got to that number piece
With
by
our
piece
with
by
our
piece.
pillars of review.
Our rubric.
Rubric.
It's a good word. So first up, for a novel, we're talking about the setting. We've already alluded to this a little earlier in the show, because we all really like it.
Yeah.
And on that note, I'm gonna kick this one off. This
Yeah.
is mine. It's a 10.
Yeah.
It's
I
a
mean,
10.
it's fair.
I mean, this is basically the perfect near solar system setting,
Mm-hmm.
right? When we're not talking about, jumping to warp
Galaxies
speed.
spanning,
Yeah.
like Star Trek, Star Wars, whatever.
Or like a Dune.
Yeah.
Those
like,
kinds of things.
These are all celestial beings that we're intimately familiar with.
Yeah. And I think for me, the biggest thing, and it kind of plays back into from what we talked about with Dune, where you're talking about, the shield's developed so it prevents this type of weapon. Well, now we've developed a fighting style to penetrate the shield to get around this other obstacle. You see a lot of that within the Expanse series as a whole, where technological innovations have happened out of the necessity of, I want to overcome that problem. And now that I've overcome that problem, I have created this, and now I have to find a way to fix this, et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm.
It builds up very naturally, which obviously it's a sci-fi setting. It fits that you see the development, not just over the series, but also right from the get-go, where each piece kind of fits in its own place and it makes sense. It has a logic for its existence, versus when you have like a fantasy setting where, why does that exist? Well, it's always been there. Oh, okay, cool. well, why does this sword work for that job and this sword doesn't? Well, that one's magic. Oh,
Yeah.
Okay, cool. For sci-fi, you can't have those kinds of catches. You can't have those kind of easy outs.
Well, because there has to be an explanation for it.
Yeah, there has to be a reason for it, because theoretically, humans created it. So there has to be a reason for the humans to create it, et cetera, et cetera. It's not just the magical tree that's been growing on the riverbank for 10 million years. It was made for a purpose.
Yeah.
And
Right. Well, I mean, it's inherent in science fiction that today, who you are and the place where you are
Mhm.
exist, and between now and the time
Getting there.
that the piece is set in, like, that's a continuum.
Right. We have to fill in those gaps.
Yeah.
So I think that for me is the big piece, is that it just feels so realistic and feels like such a logical outcome from step to step to step. Because
Mhm.
some sci-fi, you're taking big leaps because you get to we put 10,000 years in between here and there. And
Yeah.
Okay, well, you could develop anything and there could be any reason for this.
Mhm.
Whereas this being kind of tighter, and I really can't remember what year.
It is not that far off. I mean, like, it's, I think, a couple hundred years.
like
but
2,500 or
yeah,
something like that?
it's really not that far.
We won't live to see it. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, people still use ballistic weapons. Like,
Well,
there's
I
no
don't-
lasers or anything.
I mean, the human body only gets so tough. That's just the reality. All right, well, on that note, I'm going to kick this over to Andrew.
Pick me.
Too late.
Oh,
It's
I
mine.
gave it to Andrew.
So I also gave it a 10.
Oh.
It honestly, so kind of piggybacking off of what you were saying, Joel, or Steven, not
Ooh,
Joel.
Oh my goodness.
Oh,
Well, it's because Joel was talking over me.
I was speaking. My mouth was moving. Words were coming out.
But yeah, so probably okay, so mostly of whatever you were saying, but I really love how the world, I'll say the solar system, the soul system is so well realized of how lived in it is.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
It really feels like you could, like, this is a logical leap of where it would be if we had, 700 years or whatever of people colonizing space and colonizing the belt and all of these celestial beings that now like they live
00?
no they just live, with low gravity, so they've grown taller because they don't have gravity holding them down like we do here on Earth, and how kind of like Mars would act as a separate entity where, like their whole goal is to make Mars another Earth. And because of that, they have to have this super rigid militaristic structure to their culture because there is no other way to survive.
Right.
Yeah.
And that is definitely something where, like, whenever we send people to go and colonize Mars, that's what I would expect it to kind of be, is everything has to have a purpose. Everyone has to be doing something that is moving the cause forward.
And the only like on Earth analog that I can think of is living on a submarine.
Yeah, like living on a submarine where like resources are so important.
Yeah.
Where like if you don't have air, you're probably gonna die.
But now imagine raising a family in the submarine and what that does to the kids, because
Generations
of
submarine.
children
Yeah.
have grown up under that rigidness.
Yeah. Well, and you could even make it a little bit more broad and even say cultures that grow up and live in like Arctic regions where there is very low amounts of resources beyond maybe just like straight food, but you like getting water or hunting and all this other kind of stuff is a lot harder to come by. And just the way that the authors kind of hammer that in real quickly throughout the book just makes it so much more of a realistic style story than something like a fantasy like Star Trek, where it's like, well, everyone lives in this utopia.
Oh my gosh, did you just call Star Trek a fantasy?
It is
No,
a
it's
fantasy.
totally a fantasy.
Yeah.
Actually, this is a conversation for a completely different time, but I have a different way of categorizing fantasy and science fiction that I want to pitch at some point. But anyway, moving on.
Don't leave us in suspense.
Okay, so there is such a thing in fantasy, particularly talking about magic systems, but like you can broaden it. But there are hard magic systems and there are soft magic systems.
Right.
And I posit that science fiction is not its own genre. Science fiction is just the technology-based hard fantasy.
Oh, get out of here.
And
It is technically a fantasy. None of us are going to live to see 2500. That in and of itself, no, I feel pretty confident. That in itself makes it a fantasy.
But Star Wars and Star Trek, those are soft fantasies that are technology-based.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I don't hate the categorization.
I mean, honestly, the only true like hard sci-fi kind of books anyways are like The Martian, where it's like all math based. And
well, right, but like
even then
you
like,
have to bring it really close to where we are now.
Yeah.
Right. The more steps removed you are from where we are
the
today,
more fantasy it becomes.
Well, by my categorization, the softer it becomes.
I don't like that.
Well, no, but the thing is, just the word choice.
Okay. The word choice and the inflection. I don't like those. I could do with less of those.
Okay. But like, anyway, taking a step back from that.
So back to the plot.
Back to the book. I think in general, sci-fi as like the core, the soul of sci-fi is best personified in stories where you take those minimal steps of saying, okay, this is a future that's really plausible, and you can see exactly how you get from where we are to then.
Yeah.
Right. But you don't stop there. Then you say, now we add in this element. This element can be very fantastical. This element can be an enormous technological step. This element can be unreasonable. And then ask the question, what now? Or what then? What happens?
What do we do?
Yeah. How does that variable change everything? And we haven't mentioned it yet, but that is exactly what the protomolecule does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and they do such a good job at throughout the series. They like it's more like drips of information or advances, and you can see throughout the book series. And I'm not going to get into obviously details because that's spoilers, but of just like the technological advances that happen because they basically
Yeah.
found the protomolecule.
But like, you know, they've got this thing that, I mean, you're shown right up front. There's some creepy stuff going on here from the prologue.
Mhm.
And it's not until like 2/3 of the way through the book that you really get a good hard look at this thing is a murder machine virus that was originally intended to land on Earth millions of years ago.
And it just didn't make
And the gas giants protected us.
Yeah.
And it got grabbed by one of the gas giants. And so the human race exists.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so like there's still a whole lot of mystery there because you don't know how it works. You don't know what its actual original intent is. You just know this thing is horrifying.
Yeah.
And it's beyond our comprehension. It's beyond our control. And the interesting story that happens there is in how do people respond to it. And this is actually a good segue back into categorization of fantasy, because the main difference, because both hard magic systems and soft magic systems can be helpful and useful in stories. Neither one of them is inherently superior to the other.
Correct.
However, if a character, a protagonist, is going to use magic, or in this case technology, because technology is magic, if you come up to me and say, we do not live in a world of magic, I will fight you. Because we have closets full of ice that are powered by lightning that we trapped in metal spider webs.
Oh, I can go
This
way.
is-
I can
this
go
is a
way
world of
further.
magic.
I can go way further than that. If a guy in the proper position, wearing the proper robes, write the right words on a piece of paper, then you are summoned. You must appear at a specific place at a specific time. Because
true.
they did that. Yeah.
It's true. It's true.
Modern magic is real trippy.
But
Okay.
anyway, that was a tangent. I'm not done. So, but if a character is going to use magic to resolve a conflict, then it has to be hard, or it has to be a hard magic system, or it won't be satisfying because you don't understand what they're doing.
Right.
But the soft magic system, as long as the characters aren't using it to resolve issues, as long as it's just creating problems, then it's great. And so
as long as you're not solving stuff with the power of friendship.
Right. So in Leviathan Wakes, we have the hard magic system, which is all of the cool technology that has been speculated about by the authors and saying this is how we envision the future being.
Yeah.
And so we get a whole lot of conflict resolution through the use of this hard magic system being this technology that does not exist for us, but exists in this story. Whereas we have a whole lot of problems being created by the soft magic system of the alien virus.
Okay.
And
I like that explanation.
I agree.
So there you go. That is why science fiction is not inherently different.
What was your setting score?
Yeah, you never gave us a score.
It was a 10, baby.
All right, 10s all around.
Stuff was amazing.
Yeah.
All right,
No, I mean the world building for Expanse in general is just amazing.
Yeah.
Like they take their very strong world building and then they just kind of put some of the other stuff on their back and they're just like, yeah, we can handle this.
Yeah.
It's no big deal.
Well, before we jump into the next category, one last point about setting. I think that's sort of relevant since Andrew brought up Star Trek, where everyone lives in a utopia, et cetera, et cetera. It's very important for this setting that at the end of the day, despite all the technological advancements, the expansion of humanity, people are still people.
Yeah.
They are still greedy. They still make bad choices. They still have intrinsic wants.
And they're still miserable.
Also that, yeah. Life is miserable. So it's very important that we
Life
have
is pain.
There you go. A bunch of that where humans are still humans. Everything, every emotion, et cetera, that they're feeling is very relatable.
Yeah.
Just because they are still definitely humans, despite the big time leap, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
I think that's very important for the setting and very important for the reader engagement throughout as we jump into our next category and talk about character.
Oh, character.
Let's see. Do I give this to Andrew?
You shouldn't give it to me. I just talked a lot.
I'll give it to Andrew. Yeah, that's true.
So I gave character a 7.
Woo.
Well, okay. So the the thing that really happens a lot with like hard sci-fi, or generally like harder sci-fi books, is that characterization of like the actual cast of people that they have that are your vehicles into the story generally are either one-note characters and they don't really get much change, or it takes a very, very long time for them to get any type of real development, because it is not about the story is not specifically about them and their journey, like a hero's journey. It is specifically about the environment that they are experiencing.
Yeah.
And what our characters, Holden in particular, because he's one of our main characters, he is experiencing something that he did not want to be a part of. He just wanted to do the right thing and go and to this distress beacon. And now he is just thrust into this position to where, well, I was the leader on the Canterbury. Now I have to be the leader here. But unfortunately for him, he doesn't really get any other real development until later on in other books. And he doesn't, he is very predictable, and you know how he is going to land on any kind of decision that he needs to make.
Right.
You can tell that pretty much within the first couple chapters of from his perspective. Then you have Miller, on the other hand, it's our gumshoe detective who is just, he is a tried and true belter that is kind of stuck in a rock and a hard place of just trying to exist on series. And then also he is given basically an unsolvable case by his commanding officer or whatever. Superior.
And it's kind of your typical like cop gets obsessed with case kind of story.
Well, and like towards the end of the book, he actually like falls in love with Julia.
Yeah.
And or Julie.
Yeah, I'll say Julie.
Yeah, Julie. And
not Cowboy Bebop.
and Miller's actually the one that does get a decent amount of character growth throughout the book. The only problem is, and the reason why this happens is because he has to make the choice to die and sacrifice himself to basically stop Eros from
destroying the Earth.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, there, I don't know, like I don't really like Miller as a character. I don't like detective type characters. One reason why I picked Inspector Clouseau as a parody, instead of a serious detective that is really passionate about their job, in which he kind of is, but he kind of isn't. He doesn't really care about his actual job, but then he finds the passion to find Julie Mao, and that drives him throughout the story. And I don't know, it just doesn't do it for me. And I know Joel has basically the exact opposite.
Well, that sounds like it's my turn.
Oh, I was gonna butt right in. Andrew's like, I'm gonna hand out this nice transition. I'm just gonna jump in.
So
oh no,
I also gave it a 7.
Oh
for
man,
exactly the opposite reason. and that is that out of our two main characters, Miller and Holden, Miller actually has an arc and Holden doesn't, and I knocked it for Holden not having an arc.
Well, and that's totally fine.
Yeah.
And I guess like, I try and look at this book as this is the only book that I have read at this point, and I can't look at, I've already read the full series and I know exactly what happens and where his character goes.
And Holden gets an arc. I don't think that it's Holden doesn't really become interesting as far as I'm concerned until really late in the series. I think he's the last character
that you actually care
to get an arc.
And most stories, generally the main character is meant to be less interesting than the people around him.
I mean,
they're a vehicle for the reader.
Meant to.
You are meant to be an insert.
That could be a philosophy. I disagree with that philosophy, and I think that it weakens stories that could be stronger.
Maybe,
but we don't know if they subscribed to that philosophy when they were writing this either.
Yeah.
So, but that is a philosophical choice that you could make. But I think kind of pivoting from that into some praise, the cast of secondary characters, particularly the crew, the surviving crew that's shipping with Holden
of the Tachi until they turn it into the Rocinante,
are all very, very well developed for not being point of view characters.
Yeah.
They all have very specific quirks that come through quickly. You get to know the characters through a lot of good dialogue and interaction. And so like it's a really well-rounded cast of characters. And so on the secondary and tertiary level character cast
are more interesting than the main characters.
More interesting than one of them because he didn't have an arc.
Miller is not interesting at all.
Miller is my favorite character out of the whole book. Miller, I like tragic figures.
He isn't even tragic.
He's absolutely tragic.
He is
the end
not.
of his arc is he gives up his life. That's tragedy. How is that not tragedy?
You could see it a mile away.
That doesn't have anything to do with it.
You could see Hamlet's ending a mile away. How is that not tragedy?
Actually, one of the tenets of like the classical tragedy is that it is very obvious to the audience where this is headed.
But by definition, sure.
Just saying, that's one of the tenets of how tragedy works. Anyways,
I did not care about Miller's sacrifice.
Anyway. So on setting, we all agreed and gave it a 10.
Yeah.
On character, we all agreed and gave it a 7, except I gave it a 9.
I was looking down at my book.
Yeah, I know I saw you checking
wrong?
the note. They were, wait, did I get this number wrong? So for me, we've got a Miller apologist, and we've got a sort of Holden apologist.
Not really.
Yeah, that's the thing.
He's not a very interesting character either. I just don't like Miller.
Really, we have a Miller apologist and a Miller don't like it just.
Hater?
Yeah, hater.
You can say hater. It's
Hater,
fine.
that's whatever. Either way, for me, and maybe this is kind of why I connect with something like, say, Cowboy Bebop animated series.
Uh-huh.
These are like the perfect kind of characters because they're already developed. They're fully formed human beings. This is not the YA 16-year-old protagonist
where they
fresh
have
in the world.
Yeah, where they have to accept their calling and all this other
These people accepted their calling. Holden joined the Navy and then washed out 10 years ago. All of the members of his crew are all people who have experienced a ton of things in their life. Like, you don't end up on the Canterbury because you are a shining beacon of success.
They are all a dead end.
Yeah, these are people who are at the end of their career's trajectory.
They're either running from their past or they don't have a future.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And Miller is same boat.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't really have a future. He really isn't pleased with what his life is like. It's just he's kind of mechanically going through it before this case lands in front of him.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that's kind of my favorite type of character because there is no pressure to develop. It's all about peeling back layers. How much more can we learn?
Seeing how deep the character can actually go and how, like, where their strengths actually lie.
Right, exactly. And again, we praise the setting for this. It feels very lived in. It feels very real. Well, just by default, these characters feel way more real than 16-year-old wonder child who has learned the magic the first time they attempted it because they are the chosen one who is the prodigy that will fulfill all the prophecies, right? Like, that is an unrealistic character.
Yeah.
Just by default.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas these characters, because they have lived their lives, like, they are not 16-year-olds. These are, I mean,
Holden's in his mid-40s.
And Miller's probably about the same, pushing 50.
The youngest is Naomi.
Yeah. So with that kind of, anyways, moving on. So for me, these are the kind of characters that I enjoy because, again, there's nothing to develop. It's all about peeling back. How does the thing that is currently happening impact them and relate to prior decisions, et cetera, et cetera? Because you look at, if I remember right, Holden was dishonorable discharge, right?
Yes. He was.
Which is, generally speaking, some kind of personal failing in the eyes of the military.
Mm-hmm.
And now his whole thing is he's going to do the right thing. The distress beacon is there. He's going to go to it because it's the right thing. He makes this broadcast that starts a literal full solar system war because it was the right thing. And that's kind of like his
shtick.
Yeah, I mean, that is Holden's thing forever. He's going to do the right thing, and there's going to be problems because of it. And those are the only two constants of Holden. So yeah, I mean, for me, these are kind of obviously not perfect because I only gave it a 9. Because while they do a really good job, y'all kind of touched on this, of really building up quickly the side characters, I think the story suffers a little, and it's cheating because I have comparison of later novels, but the rigid commitment to bouncing from Holden, Miller, Holden, Miller, Holden, Miller. Well, that makes for kind of an interesting pattern within the storytelling. I think from a character perspective, it hurts it a little bit because there are opportunities to kind of carry emotions through for this specific group or this specific individual, and it's lost just because you're constantly shifting perspective over and over and over. So
I will say, and this is more of just a general thing, I really get excitement whenever I'm reading a book like this where it changes perspective and you can see the past finally beginning to merge.
Oh yeah.
And then you have like the ending of one chapter, and then it starts with the other character on the next chapter, and it is like the next line of dialogue of what just left off, and I love that.
Yeah, where you can really feel, and that's going to show up later.
In
that's
writing,
a later piece, but yeah, we'll get there.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that we covered character, pretty much as much as we want to. So moving forward into the plot.
Oh yeah.
I guess by default, Joel has to lead this one.
No, you need to start it.
I started the first one.
No, you didn't.
I took 7.
Well, okay, yeah, I guess he did.
So I gave plot an 8.
Oh wow.
So this one, like you were talking about point of view and it being limiting on showing attributes of characters with having a rigid format of bouncing back and forth between the two main characters. And I think that also hurt the plot some too.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of political machinations that's going on that we only know a little bit about because they hear about stuff that Earth and Mars are doing on the news feed.
Yeah,
right?
we have unreliable, limited viewpoint narrators, but we also have 2 of them.
Yeah. Well, and so you don't get to, this is a grand scale happening, right?
That happens over a very long period of time.
It does. And so by having we have 3 major players in that, as we alluded to before, the 2 inner planets and the belt as kind of a nebulous sort
entity.
Of loosely connected
single OPA.
A coalition.
Yeah. And so we have Miller as a POV for the belt, basically, because he's got kind of the insight into how they work, and he understands and he reads the signs and he translates for the audience what he sees. And so you've got that, but you really don't have anything for either of the others, because even though Holden is from Earth, like he's left Earth behind a long time ago.
He's very disconnected.
He has no ties, no connections.
He has family.
Well, and I don't think but he hadn't talked with his family in like 20 or something.
But it's not like he's been disowned.
Yeah, there's no estrangement there. It's just he was on an ice hauler in the Outer Rim.
He's
He's
at the twilight of his career's trajectory, which is just this rust bucket of an ice hauler in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
And so there was a whole lot of ways that you could tell this story that could have given us a better insight into what was going on, because we already had plenty of, oh no, I have no idea what's happening with the protomolecule. Right. And so we don't have to have that with the political intrigue. And they actually changed this a little bit. And this is one of the things that I think was a very positive change, where they actually inserted extra points of view when they adapted it for the sci-fi TV show.
Yeah, they did a great job of inserting characters that show up later on in other books earlier, so you can see multiple perspectives of kind of more the political side of things besides just Holden and Miller.
That's kind of maybe the admission that and you see it within later books, right? The authors kind of accept that, hey, maybe this is a little too limiting for what we're building.
Well, I mean, one of their major characters dies at the end, so like, right? But we're just down to 1. What's happening?
I don't like jumping out ahead.
Yeah.
But they do, book per book, you're always introduced to somebody new, a new dynamic. And I always have that moment of, I'm not going to like this person as much as the last one. And then I absolutely love them. So, even though we know we lose a main character, we're always going to get good characters going forward.
Yeah. The different perspectives, the problem is whenever you have a book like this and you are forcing your reader into these perspectives. If the reader doesn't find those perspectives interesting, it's a really hard read.
Yeah, well, and we cover this a bit talking about Red Rising. Same potential issue, although more magnified. But for you, well, I don't like Miller. Well, that's just half of the book that is a slog.
Well, I really didn't like his early stuff. Was Jim just living his life on series? and then him just kind of like doing like small little breadcrumb things of trying to find Julie Mao and everything. Like I was just so over that after like chapter 1.
See, for me, that kind of slow build up is fun because if again, provided you know that you've got a good book in your hand, you know that there's going to be big build up and payoffs.
Oh yeah,
played out on those. It's just you have to have that faith to hold on to that.
Yeah, well, it and them having then the perspective of Holden, where it's kind of like this run and gun, just make it work,
shoot from the hip.
Yeah, shoot from the hip. Make sure that we just don't die. Kind of experience while like he's experiencing the Donninger being blown up, and then they're running with the Rocinante or Tachi at the time, and they're trying. There's just all this other stuff happening, and then it's just like, all right, back to Miller, just doing his detective
trying
work,
to put on his pork pie hat.
Yeah. What did you have for score?
Plot.
Did you have a plot?
Score.
Did you give us a score for the plot?
I did not.
What you got?
I gave it a 9.
Okay. Well, hey, we got agreement here. I gave it a 9 too. So I like, because you touched on the point about Holden's kind of the run and gun, just don't die, and we have this huge disaster.
Just make it work until we can figure something else out.
Right. So I love how in the plot we have one of those moments of this isn't that kind of book, and it's fairly early. So we have the initial crew that was on the I don't even know, the shuttle that left the Canterbury. I don't remember if it had a name.
The Knight.
Is the Knight?
Yeah.
Knight? Okay.
I think that was a shortening because
there was some
something. Either way. But we have the initial crew, and then they end up on the Donninger before the battle breaks out. And you have the prototypical perfect crew. You have the captain with ideals, a hyper-capable XO, great pilot, star mechanic, and a medic. We've fulfilled all of the necessary... And the medic's dead.
Yeah.
And it's just one of those where it's just like, this isn't one of those kind of stories where everyone's going to last forever and be a perfect integral working cogs. Y'all are gonna have to figure this out and make it work.
Yeah.
And I like that also, the fact that again, it's the one person who potentially could have fixed a problem that happened. Obviously the way it actually happens, there's no fixing it, but it's the medic who gets shot.
Yeah.
So that initial moment for me was really jarring because it's just one of those, I thought like this was going to be my characters that I was going to be with. And it's like, okay, we're going to have to accept now this is not that kind of story.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that kind of beat hitting in a plot fairly early on, just to really establish tone and say, hey, this is the story you're getting. This is what your expectation should be. Everyone's at risk. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sorry, just got to lift up my notes so I can actually see it. Going back to Joel's points here about hard magic and soft magic, I did make a point that even the quote unquote magic within the setting, within the plot, ultimately comes off more as horror, which is kind of your own thing. Because it is the obstacle, and it's a really good obstacle for them to try to work around and figure out. Because from the reader's perspective, we know nothing because our characters don't know a thing for basically their whole encounter with it. And I really tried to look and try to find holes in the plot, and it's really hard not because they took a magic system and papered over the holes, but because they took a viewpoint system and they gave you two really limited viewpoints.
Yeah, so they're not, absolutely. It makes it really hard to poke holes in the plot because you didn't get a close look at it.
Yeah. Well, you can say, well, how was I supposed to know this was going to happen? No one else got to know this was going to happen either. So it happens somewhere else. You don't get to know it. Tough, deal with it. I think that was kind of just a funny result of the way the perspective was chosen, was just, there are no plot holes because you don't get to know Jack.
Yeah.
So,
send it to Andrew.
Well, so I gave it a 9. I still love the story. And I talked what I kind of said what I didn't like, which is mostly Miller's stuff. Mm-hmm. However, whenever
Miller's stuff, like the way he walks.
Whenever the two storylines, Holden and Miller's, kind of merge on Eros, and then they go through the whole ordeal of trying to get back to their ship and get off, and then they have they basically get exposed to radiation. Him and Holden and Miller while they're trying
and it's
to
not their initial
escape.
Meeting is not a friendly alliance.
No,
it is not a happy-go-lucky. Oh, we're best of friends now. Like that is not how this works.
Mm-hmm. And it progresses to where they finally find the dark station, and they know that the scientists that are working on the protomolecule are there essentially, and the Rocinante goes, and probably the best example of what space combat would actually be
Mhm.
in a truly exhilarating sequence
Mhm.
in the book, where the Rocinante is going against 2-to-1 versus stealth ships, and they don't have like a rail. All they have is just PDCs and torpedoes
Which is
at this
point defense cannons, which is basically just machine guns
hmm
that are
meant-
computerized, meant to mostly shoot down incoming torpedoes.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, not like meant to like shoot other ships.
Yeah.
And Alex and Amos just make this fantastic just battle, like so interesting.
Mhm.
And really, I mean, like, because at this point in the book, you don't know who's gonna live.
Well, it's also interesting too in that, because it's not, well, like when you're saying it's this gripping and interesting fight sequence, it's not because the fight itself is being described.
Yeah.
Because it's not, because your point of view is
Holden.
who is not the pilot.
Yeah.
He is not directly interfacing with the tactical decisions being made.
hmm
He's on
He's
the
basically
strategic
just
level.
on there for the ride.
Yeah. And so what is being described through this is his experience of feeling the high G maneuvers that they're
Mhm.
going through to try to dodge incoming fire, and seeing the bits of shrapnel that are flying through the depressurized cabin when they get hit with PDC fire, and the rounds just go straight through the ship.
hmm
And they're fine because they already evacuated all the air and they're in suits. But like you have this tension and this constant fear of any one of them could just and die at any second, because you already saw it.
You
Because
already been introduced
the
to
Yeah.
medic did that.
Yeah. Well, and also to your point about the intensity of the battle, because when they're on the Donager, again, they're not active participants in the fight. And you get a little bit of knowledge about what's going on, because Alex is basically saying, well, there's your torpedoes. That's railgun fire.
Yep.
PDCs are going off. We've got stuff coming really close to us, but you don't actually get to experience it until the immediacy of that first hit punches through their room.
hmm
Whereas here, again, we just saw, because the Donager is promoted as it's the best in its class, the biggest, baddest, and it gets its butt whooped.
hmm
And now we're finding the flip side of, well, how do you fight this type of opponent? And it's shenanigans, basically.
Mhm.
Yeah, close quarter and get in there and just
Yeah,
try and outmaneuver him, basically.
Yeah, the long range brute strength doesn't work, so we find a new approach,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's, again, like, for this segment, oftentimes we would sit here and be like, oh, well, they missed this, they could have, and we can't, because you don't, one, it's a well-written story,
Yeah.
and two, you just don't get enough perspective to be able to punch holes.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I wasn't the biggest fan of the climax of the whole book.
That's because it was pretty Miller centric.
It was
It was
pretty
all
Mil- well,
Miller-centric.
mostly just because he's just talking to himself, or he's just
it's the resolution of the character arc, right?
No,
like
I understand that and I accept it, and that is totally fine.
what is that? I understand it, and
I don't have to like it.
I don't I don't like it. I don't agree with it,
But I understand it.
but I accept it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it also gets, because you're dealing very, very closely with protomolecule, it gets very, very soft magic.
Right,
Abstract.
but like
Yeah.
he's not. I think the key here is that if he was like, I get infected and then I'm going to do the thing, that is your protagonist using the soft magic to
Mhm.
solve
Mhm.
to resolve the conflict, which is not what happens,
Right.
because all he does is he makes a human connection, and so through that narrative, kind of the nature of his sacrifice is kind of examined.
Mhm.
And what he is doing is he's decided that something actually matters, right? He's gone through all this life he's just kind of going through the motions, nothing matters, but
Mhm.
he has finally decided Julie matters, and whatever this thing is, it's still Julie.
Yeah.
And so that's where I'm going to be.
And it's a little weird.
I
It's a
mean,
little
yeah,
weird.
sure, it's a little weird, and you're not supposed to understand how it works because protomolecule, right? Like we're
Yeah.
not at the
Well,
level.
no,
of
I
knowing
don't
what
mean
is.
that. I mean, like his acceptance of this is my worldview now. It's a little weird.
His
It's okay, but
he's
it's a little
not
weird.
entirely stable.
No, nobody really is, because again, we're dealing with burnt out,
Yeah.
end of trajectory characters essentially. So,
Yeah.
well, that, I think, covers the plot pretty well for
Mhm.
us. So we're gonna move forward into
Writing.
the writing. And I'm trying to turn my page. So I'm going to take this first because I'm going to steal all the good points and leave y'all with the tidbits. So I gave writing a 9. And I think the biggest selling point, again, is how the writing built the world, and specifically with the Belter language.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's really
the Belter Creole is really cool.
The blending of various languages, because it is a blended society, but also the emphasis on how, again, space living has been built into their own language, where you have the shrugs, but you shrug with a hand because you're wearing a suit, so no one's going to see you shrug your shoulders. And that's just accepted commonplace activity for these people. So you build it into it's the slang, right? We mostly always talk about, well, how do they build? And one of the ways to build is slang or curse words. And that kind of little extra tidbits is just that little extra piece of spice on top of all the technological world building that really sells it for me. And I think that all comes in the writing, because you had to sit down and basically play, Tolkien and create a language.
Yeah.
And it's a little cheating because, it's fairly, even if you don't understand French or Spanish, etc., you can still, for the most part, I think, suss it out, what's being said.
Yeah, the only counterpoint that I would have to that is really more that traditionally, as, humanity gets older and we expand out, Mandarin is probably going to be the more commonly accepted cultural influence, just because it's so much more widespread than something
from a realism standpoint, sure.
Yeah.
From I'm writing this book to be read by Americans standpoint.
No, like I totally understand that.
Yeah.
See, I think, and it's interesting because you make that point, right? You don't get a tremendous amount of Chinese influence on culture. You do get a ton of Indian influence, especially in the later books. You really see it. And I think that fits because it's really easy for us in present day socio-political, economic society, whatever, to say, oh, well, China is going to be the clear winner. But in terms of population, India is right behind them.
Yeah.
And now economically, sure, you can make other arguments, but that doesn't guarantee a winner.
Yeah, in 200-300 years, a lot can change.
Yeah, I mean,
absolutely.
If you back up 200 years, well, we're all British.
Yeah. Well, I guess
how it works.
I guess my point would be, it's just them choosing basically like New Orleans Creole as like the base of the Belter communication and culture.
Yeah,
was an interesting choice. I don't mind it at all. I thought it was really cool.
Yeah.
I just don't think from a realistic perspective that would ever be a thing.
Well, it also is indicative not of what is the most populous subgroup of humanity, but which group of humanity was pushed out. Right.
Yeah. I mean, and that's totally fair. Like it's, clearly there's class warfare style of politics happening here. And obviously the people that are working in the belt are the lower class, the have-nots that are basically blue collar workers that have been forced into, basically providing resources for Earth and Mars. And clearly they have a resistance, they have the OPA, they're upset about this, and shenanigans happen.
It fits too, because again, from your argument, you're saying, well, Mandarin should be the greater influence. Well, if they were the victors in the cultural war, then they're all on Earth, and you see it, right?
That's fair. Yeah,
we have
that's
Julie
totally fair.
Mao.
Yeah, I mean, yes, like a lot of the, especially like the Mars, MCRN people, they're pretty much all Asian oriented, and it's just interesting, just the fact that like, just from other stuff, I'll say like Firefly or Outlaw Star and everything like that, like Mandarin and Chinese is very, very heavily influenced.
It is, yes. I mean, it is. And it's, again, I think it does end up boiling down to Joel's point of, this is not, people who are out in the belt were not the winners of the socioeconomic struggle.
And that is actually a fair point.
Yeah. So my only other big point, and you kind of touched on this, Andrew, it's Miller's perspective, because we don't have, this is not a 16-year-old YA, our chosen protagonist with his wise guiding hand throughout the story
Yeah.
for the character, or not the character, but the reader to be introduced to concepts by the character asking questions, not knowing how the world works, et cetera, et
Yeah,
cetera.
there's really not a lot of exposition.
Right. What we do get is, and you talk about this with Miller's early chapters, we get kind of a translation
Of him just living his life.
right, of what this life is like and what other people are saying and doing and why they are doing it, because he has that the detective, the analytical mind. He sees it and he processes the why just automatically. So I think that helped because it's not a quote unquote neophyte style character, but it still lets us learn a lot as a reader.
Well, and I mean, I gave it points for that. That was actually pretty much exactly what I was going to say.
Okay,
I gave it an 8 out of 10.
Yeah, take over.
For basically that reason is because there's no overt exposition from the main characters asking questions to someone else that just knows everything. You do get to experience the universe with them. And through that experience, you do get the same explanation, just in a longer amount of time throughout the book, instead of just like, this is how society works.
It's just the basic tenet of don't info dump.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's very, very much the show don't tell style of storytelling, which I love. Like, it's fantastic. Joel?
Well, I also gave the writing an 8 out of 10. I thought that there was the descriptions were plentiful, right? Like it was a very, very rich book in terms of, like, we got to understand how things looked and felt. There were a lot of senses beyond sight that were used all over the place in the descriptive language, which really enriches your understanding and like your immersion into the writing.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like wordy or frilly to like bog it down.
It wasn't Jules Verne levels of description.
Yeah, it was efficient.
Robert Jordan.
Well, actually, see, Robert Jordan though, like that's elevating it to an art. I feel like, because his prose is just amazing. Like
No, you're good. No, you're safe.
The bog down in his work is more plot related than the writing.
I do think, and this is a totally different topic for a totally different episode, I do think he does run into an issue of, I don't need to know what every single thing in front of this character's eyes looks like.
No, that's true. Like, you need to be drawn in, but you don't have to live there.
Right. Well, and there's an advantage in the Expanse throughout, right? In that there are no grand sweeping vistas by default. The biggest, grandest, sweepingest of vista is just blank space.
Yeah.
It's about as easy a description as you need.
Yep. And then they're just like, it's the void.
Yeah.
It is death.
And it's uncomfortable. But here's this neat hallway, and you can smell that little bit of oxidation as one of the wires is burning, and that means I need to check that filter before it goes bad.
Yeah.
I did want to add. Actually, no, never mind. This is an entertainment perspective, so we can keep talking about writing.
So anyway, the last point that I have about the writing, and it's kind of going back to the descriptions, but also like what the authors chose to focus on during their descriptive text. They are focusing on the experiences that the main characters have going through thrust, for instance, like when the engines are on heavy burn, like 3 times Earth gravity or even more at some points, talks about how that feels on their body, right? Like what that experience is like, because that's something that the vast majority of us have absolutely no idea what that feels like. Right. I mean, we can think about it and we can speculate, but we have not experienced that. And to be able to bring that in very personal terms and say their eyes felt like this because they were so heavy, and there was the pressure on their arms and their legs and their stomach, and just the way that they brought it all together made it feel like you could know what that felt like.
Right. And I think they cover it well too. We see the bit when they first get off the Donner, right? They get off the Donner with the Martian Marines, who throughout the series always get the best send outs in all the books. But they have I don't know if it's a corporal or captain, I cannot remember.
The lieutenant's the one that makes it on the ship with them.
And he has the information, the vital information that has to get out, but he has his armor's been damaged, his ribs are cracked, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they make a very clear point that I think it's from Holden's perspective, obviously, because they're on the Donnager.
Mm-hmm.
He knows, Holden knows, and the lieutenant knows that when they go up to anything above 1G, it's going to kill the lieutenant.
Yeah.
Like that's just the nature of his injuries and how they're positioned,
Yeah,
et
there's
cetera.
just no way.
There's no choice. And it's the acceptance that they both know the realities of their situation. And the answer is still pull the trigger, put the pedal down. That is what we have to do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really interesting because we get the mechanics and the description of kind of the push of gravity and also the counter force that is the juice, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's being pumped in just to basically prop up their bodies under this pressure.
Which is just, low grade methamphetamine.
Or high grade.
Or high grade, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
I mean, that was actually my point earlier that I was going to say. But it was, I love the concept of the juice.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because of how it is essentially propping up our frail bodies to make space travel possible.
And they did a really good job in this novel about showing you the consequences of using that, because there's even a point where Holden specifically restrains them from going to high G because he weighs the consequences of what the after effects of using the juice is going to do to them, and he doesn't think that trade-off is worth it in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's really good too, where you give drawbacks to your assets.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Well, on that note, we're kind of bleeding into entertainment.
Yeah.
So we're going to hit our final category. Obviously, it didn't go into the composite score. It has its own separate category that we already went over prior to. It was a 9.3.
Yep.
So spoilers, there's some high numbers coming. And we're going to start off with the highest. So I'll kick it over to Andrew.
I gave it a 10.
Yeah.
I've read the book twice, and I'll probably read it a third time just so I can reread the whole series now that it's completely out, and just so I can go back to back.
Yeah. And that's despite not liking 50% of the point of view.
It's like in the odd thing is too, like, I think it's just because like the entertainment value is so high because you don't know anything going into the story by this point. So there's no preconceived notions of what to expect. And everything you get is just a good escalation of what you thought it was going to be, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
To where like, oh, I think there's going to be a space battle. That was a heck of a space battle. And it just keeps escalating and escalating and escalating to where even if I don't like Miller as a character, I can still understand what he's doing, why he's doing it, and it makes it more interesting than not.
Yeah.
So yeah, amazing read. I'm going to do it again at some point. Like, it's great.
Yeah. So I am going to jump in and just I gave it a 9. I have not sat down and read it multiple times. Although you make a great point about now that the series is complete, going back and just going boom, 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 boom.
Yeah.
Because I actually did that almost all that. I left off the first 3 books back when we thought we had a different schedule ahead of us.
Yeah.
And it would be nice to go back and just go through the whole thing kind of at its own pace.
Yeah. You just read it, not having to, finish 2 books in a week.
And yes. But overall, this is fantastic and phenomenal. It on its own strength from Andrew's recommendation and Lauren's recommendation, the first book carried me through the first 5 books just on its own momentum, and then life kind of got in the way and it fell off, etc. But it's a great start, and for the most part, it really only kind of gets better from here in entertainment.
Yeah.
So that is its own. Don't just take this 9.3 and say, well, maybe that's 9 or somehow that's not a good enough score for my entertainment. It gets better from here, people.
Yeah,
it's just up.
And I would definitely say, at least for me, Leviathan Wakes is probably one of my least favorite books.
Still a 10
out of the series, and it's still a 10.
Joel?
Well, I gave it a 9. I'm gonna take a pit stop and disagree. I think Leviathan Wakes is one of the better entries.
One of the better ones.
Because it's had Miller.
Because it had Miller.
No, actually not because it had Miller. But it does have a lot.
It's one of the more complete plots.
Right, yeah. Because there's a lot in the second one that like really should have just been the first one. Like the middle entry, because it's kind of split up into 3 trilogies that are just kind of contiguous back to back. And the middle entry in each one are the weakest books out of the series, in my opinion.
I don't know. Caliban's War is really good, but I think Abaddon's Gate is the best of the trilogy for the first 3 books.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's beyond the scope
I digress.
of this conversation. But no, like it's getting to go through the steps of, now we get to find out this facet of how the world has developed, right? It's this constant trickle feed of information about how the world got to where it is and how it's being presented to you.
Yeah.
And then every time you feel like you understand it, something new is thrown at you, or the proto-molecule attacks, and and you're just completely swept off your feet again of I have no idea what's going on. Like I have all of this background knowledge, and that pool of background knowledge is building and building and building as we go along, but like I still need more. And so that experience of never feeling like you've had enough and you constantly want more is exactly what I'm looking for in a read.
Yeah, it was just great. Yeah.
I mean, high marks all around. Obviously, we all pretty much loved it throughout, except for Andrew hated half of it, still loved it enough to give it 10. I mean, if that's not enough of an endorsement, Andrew only really liked 50% of this book, and that 50% is still a 10.
It's still 100%.
So by default, Holden must be like a 20 if Miller's like a 0 to make that a 10 somehow. Anyways, enough
really
math.
Just Amos. He's the best character.
Well, we'll get there. We'll get there. You gotta get a little further before he gets really good.
I mean, Amos is just fantastic though.
Yeah, and all of the characters, even though we were handed 2 perspectives for a whole book, everyone else gets their time in the sun, and it really shows through. So on that note, I do believe that is all the time we have for this episode. So until next time, I'm Steven.
I'm Andrew.
And I'm Joel.
And every spoiler was intended. Thank you for tuning in. If you like what you heard, you can support the show for as low as $1 at patreon.com/spoilersintendedpodcast. We also have a Discord server and would love to have more people joining in the conversation. Links are in the description below. Thank you.